When you've been left behind by someone avoidant, you moved on, you healed, you grew, and now they're suddenly back in your orbit. But this time, it's not about their usual push-pull pattern. This time, life itself has been teaching them lessons they couldn't learn while you were there. Reality has a way of humbling people. And when an avoidant finally faces the world without you, they start to see what they lost. Let's talk about why they're coming back, and more importantly, what it means for you. When they walked away from you, they carried with them a dangerous illusion, the belief that the world was overflowing with possibilities. They convinced themselves that someone better was waiting just around the corner, someone who wouldn't challenge their emotional walls, someone who would demand less and accept the bare minimum they were willing to offer. In their mind, what you brought to the relationship wasn't special or unique. They believed that the deep connection you shared, the loyalty you demonstrated, the patience you exhibited while they processed their fears, and the genuine understanding you offered were all common qualities they could find in anyone. This delusion gave them the confidence to walk away without looking back. But reality has a harsh way of correcting false beliefs, and life wasted no time dismantling their fantasy. They went out into the world with expectations that quickly crumbled. They tried to recreate what you gave them, searching desperately for that same energy, that same unconditional acceptance, that same willingness to see beyond their defensive mechanisms and love the person underneath. Every attempt ended in disappointment. The new people they encountered didn't possess your depth. They lacked your emotional intelligence. They weren't willing to invest the time and energy required to understand someone as complicated as an avoidant. Most importantly, these new connections didn't care enough to stay when things got difficult. When faced with emotional distance and inconsistency, they simply left, unwilling to fight for something that felt one-sided. The conversations felt transactional and shallow, never reaching the profound depths they had experienced with you. The connections felt hollow, lacking the substance and meaning that characterized what you shared together. And slowly, painfully, like a fog lifting to reveal an ugly truth, they began to realize what they had done. What you brought to their life wasn't ordinary or replaceable. It was extraordinarily rare. You were someone who saw value in them even when they couldn't see it in themselves. And they had taken that precious gift completely for granted. Now they're seeing the world with clarity they didn't possess before, and the view is devastating. The grass they thought would be greener on the other side turned out to be nothing more than artificial turf, pretty from a distance, but lifeless and fake up close. Nothing and no one has felt genuine or real since the day you walked out of their life, and that realization is eating them alive. Avoidants have spent years, sometimes decades, perfecting the art of convincing themselves that they genuinely prefer solitude over connection. They'll tell anyone who listens that they need abundant space, that they place the highest value on independence, that they function better and feel more authentic when they're alone. For a while, especially in the immediate aftermath of the breakup, this narrative appears to hold true. They feel relief, even liberation, from not having to meet someone else's emotional needs or navigate the complexities of intimate connection. But there exists a fundamental difference between chosen solitude, the peaceful state of being alone because you want to be, and the hollow, aching emptiness that follows losing someone irreplaceable from your life. After you were gone, after the initial relief wore off and reality settled in, the silence that once felt freeing became absolutely deafening. They started noticing your absence in ways they never anticipated. The inside jokes that no one else understood or found funny suddenly had no audience. The way you instinctively knew when to push them toward growth and when to pull back and give them space became a lost art that no one else possessed. The profound comfort of being fully known, completely seen and understood, even when they tried desperately to hide behind their walls, vanished entirely. All those little moments of connection they had previously dismissed as too much or criticized as suffocating suddenly transformed into the very things they found themselves craving in the darkness of their lonely nights. The loneliness they once weaponized as proof of their independence stopped feeling peaceful and started feeling like a punishment they had inflicted upon themselves. In that enforced isolation, surrounded by silence and their own thoughts, they finally began to understand a truth that had been obvious to everyone else all along. You were never the problem in the relationship. Their fear was the problem. Their inability to accept love was the problem. Their tendency to run when things got too real was the problem. And now that fear, that avoidance, that emotional cowardice has cost them the one person who actually managed to break through their carefully constructed defenses and touch something real inside them. The irony is almost poetic. They pushed away the very person who made them feel less alone, and now they're lonelier than they've ever been. Here's something that avoidants don't truly comprehend until it's far too late to matter. You were functioning as their emotional anchor throughout the entire relationship. You absorbed the impact of their stress without complaint, tolerated their maddening inconsistency without walking away, and provided a stability they never once acknowledged or appreciated. When life became overwhelming and difficult, you were the soft place they could land, the safe harbor in their storm, even though they would never openly admit to needing one. Your presence created a buffer between them and the harsh realities of the world, protecting them in ways they couldn't see because they were too busy maintaining their emotional distance. But now, in your absence, that protective buffer is completely gone, and life is hitting them with its full, unfiltered force. The challenges at work that used to feel manageable now feel overwhelming because they have no one to talk through them with. Family issues that arise create stress they have to process entirely alone. Health scares emerge, and they find themselves in doctor's offices with no one to call, no one who cares enough to ask how the appointment went. There are moments when they desperately, urgently need someone to talk to, someone who will truly listen and understand, and they discover there's simply no one available who possesses the patience and compassion you demonstrated. They attempted to reach out to other people in their lives, but those individuals didn't have the deep well of patience you drew from. They lacked the intuitive understanding of how an avoidance mind works. They didn't share the history and context that allowed you to know exactly what they needed, even when they couldn't articulate it themselves. Reality has shown them in the most brutal way possible what you were protecting them from all along, the genuine harshness of navigating life's difficulties truly alone without a partner who has your back. And now they finally see your value and recognize your worth, not because you're desperately begging for their attention or trying to convince them of what they lost, but because your absence has created a void that reveals exactly what you were contributing. The negative space you left behind has become the most powerful testimony to your importance in their life. This particular realization stings them the most deeply and cut straight to their ego. When they made the decision to leave, they harbored very specific expectations about how you would react to their departure. They thought, perhaps even hoped, that you would completely fall apart without them. In their mind, you would chase after them, send lengthy messages begging for closure or another chance, or at minimum, remain stuck in the past, unable to move forward with your life. That expectation fed their ego and validated their choice to walk away, allowing them to feel powerful and in control. But you did something they didn't anticipate, something that completely shattered their predictions. You moved forward with your life. You took time to heal from the pain they caused. You focused your energy on yourself, your goals, your growth, your happiness. You built a rich, fulfilling life that didn't revolve around their emotional unavailability or their inability to show up consistently. And whether through social media posts, conversations with mutual friends, or random encounters in your shared city, they began to see the evidence of your transformation. They watched you experience what can only be described as a glow up. They saw you smiling genuinely in photos, clearly happy and at peace. They heard about you thriving in your career, achieving goals and reaching milestones. They observed you surrounded by people who actually rate your worth, who value your presence, who don't take you for granted the way they did. And witnessing your success, your happiness, your ability to not just survive, but truly thrive without them broke something fundamental inside their psyche. Because in that moment of recognition, they realized they were no longer the main character in your story, no longer the center of your universe. They had been demoted to a chapter you closed, a lesson you learned, a part of your past rather than your present or future. And that shift in power dynamics, that fundamental change in the narrative where you became genuinely okay without them rather than desperately needing them, made them realize with terrifying clarity that they might have lost you permanently and irrevocably. The fear of permanent loss, of being forgotten, of being replaced is precisely what's driving their desire to come back now. They can handle you being sad about losing them, but they can't handle you being happy without them. They entered the dating world after leaving you with a very specific goal in mind, finding someone less complicated, someone who wouldn't ask difficult questions about feelings and future plans, someone who wouldn't want or expect emotional intimacy, someone who would be content to just exist on the surface with them where everything felt safe and controlled. And initially, they succeeded in finding exactly those people, plenty of them. In fact, there was no shortage of individuals willing to engage in shallow, surface level connections that demanded nothing real or vulnerable. But here's the fundamental problem they didn't foresee. Surface level connections are incredibly boring once you've experienced something deeper. The spark that existed between you was completely missing with everyone else. The chemistry felt forced and artificial rather than natural and electric. The conversations never progressed beyond mundane small talk and logistical planning, never reaching the intellectual and emotional depths you explored together. They found themselves in situations with people who seemed perfect on paper, checking all the boxes, but something essential was absent. The intensity was gone, the passion was gone, the passion was gone, the feeling of being truly seen and understood was gone. They realized, often while lying next to someone new, that what they had previously criticized and labeled as too intense was actually the very element that made the relationship meaningful and worth having. Your emotional intelligence that allowed you to read between their lines was irreplaceable. Your ability to see through their defenses and understand what they really meant rather than just what they said was a rare gift. Your refusal to settle for breadcrumbs when you deserved the whole meal was actually admirable rather than demanding. Every shallow interaction with someone new became a painful reminder of what they lost. Every encounter with an emotionally unavailable person became a mirror, reflecting their own dysfunctional patterns back at them in ways they couldn't ignore. And in those uncomfortable reflections, they kept seeing you, the one person who had offered real connection, real vulnerability, real love, the authentic experience they had been running from their entire lives. And they had voluntarily walked away from it, convinced they were making the smart choice. Now they desperately want you back, because nothing and no one else even comes close to comparing. Avoidants are absolute experts at rationalization, masters of the mental gymnastics required to justify any decision they make. They can minimize any loss, downplay any consequence, and convince themselves through elaborate mental arguments that they made the right choice, even when all evidence points to the contrary. This defense mechanism has served them well throughout their lives, protecting them from the discomfort of regret and self-examination. But time has a way of cutting through even the most sophisticated narratives we tell ourselves. After enough distance from the breakup, after enough failed connections that went nowhere, after enough lonely nights spent wondering what went wrong, the truth begins to settle in like sediment in water, unavoidable and undeniable. They messed up, not in some vague, abstract, philosophical way that can be rationalized or explained away, but in a deep, concrete, life-altering way that changes the entire trajectory of their existence. They let go of someone who loved them authentically and unconditionally, who saw their flaws and imperfections and chose to stay anyway, who was genuinely willing to build something real and lasting with them despite all the obstacles. And they threw that precious opportunity away because they were afraid of vulnerability, afraid of being truly known, afraid of the responsibility that comes with being loved. Regret isn't a comfortable emotion for anyone, but it's particularly excruciating for avoidants who have spent their entire lives avoiding uncomfortable feelings. It forces them to confront their own emotional cowardice, to acknowledge their self-sabotaging patterns, to accept responsibility for their choices. But regret is also the specific emotion that's bringing them back to you now, driving them to reach out after months or even years of silence. Because genuine regret, when it's real and not just a temporary feeling of missing what's familiar, demands corrective action. It pushes them to pick up the phone, to write that message, to apologize for their behavior, to attempt to fix what they broke. The question that remains, the one only you can answer, is whether you're willing to let them back in after everything that's happened, after all the pain they caused, after all the growth you've experienced in their absence.